And welcome back to MMHC. Eddie, how you doing, man?
I'm already laughing. I'm good. I have nothing, dude. How are you?
I'm doing well, other than I did get COVID again for what I think is the fourth time this week, so that sucks.
You had it 4 times this week?
Yes. Just, I keep testing and it keeps coming back positive. Yeah. I just chalk that up as another positive. No, I think 4 times total in my life. So
yeah.
I'm basically just half COVID at this point. I'm like the Bionic Man, but instead of technology, it's just virus.
It's just COVID, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you feeling well enough to join us today.
Well, thank you. If I appear to be a little bit more nasally than normal, you guys will have the answer as to why.
Well, what are we doing today? What are we talking about? I have no idea. We're just jumping into it. Didn't even prepare. Just kidding.
No script, nothing. This is all by the seat of our pants. Just kidding. Today we are talking toxic masculinity. And no, this isn't a bad superhero from the 70s. This is a popular subject. Have you ever heard of the Toxic Avenger? Have you ever heard of that one?
No. What is that?
It was like a superhero from the 70s who fell into some toxic sludge and was just like a big goopy monster, but also a good guy. So that was a very far stretch of a joke.
I was going to say he fell into the goop and then was just like a dick to everybody.
Yeah. And he's just emotionally toxic to everyone in his life.
Ghost people, constantly gaslighting, just like the biggest jerk. Like the Avengers had to cut him out. They're like, "Nah, man, you're out of the group."
You're out of the group. I wish that's actually what the show was about. It's just some guy, some radioactive poisoning, and he just becomes a dick.
Obscure comic book heroes is the episode.
Yes.
Yeah. One time I had a professor that would do warm-up questions, and one of his warm-up questions was, "If you could have a superpower, what would it be?" Yeah. And I was like, everyone was picking all the typical ones, like flight or like super strength, whatever, super fast, whatever it was. And I was like, dude, I need something different. Like, I need to be different because that's where my mind goes. So I Googled like top 100 superpowers, and one of them was like the ability to create rubber bouncy balls. I don't really know what it does, like how it helps anything, but apparently it was in the top 100.
Wow, I mean, that's common enough that it cracked the list, huh? People are that into bouncy balls.
It's got to be like Family Feud, where like 2 people said it, so it made the list. Like when someone says something, they're like, "Oh, there's no way it's up there," and then it ends up there. Like, oh, I guess 2 people are weird.
Yeah, I guess 2 people are super into bouncy balls. I mean, just chuck them at people. Like,
I don't know. I don't know. It was up there.
Yeah. I remember one time when I was in junior high, you know how sometimes when you're that age, you exaggerate things for the sake of a good story. And so I was talking about how I had a bouncy ball that would bounce higher than what I dropped it, which defies the laws of physics.
Yeah.
And I had a math teacher that was like, well, then how did it ever stop bouncing? Like, she called me out on it, and I was like, and then isn't it amazing that I still remember that so vividly? I was just like, you know what? You're right.
I'm gonna be quiet now. Never mind.
I was lying, and your understanding of physics. Mrs. Eatman, I believe.
Shout out Mrs. Eatman. I hope you're doing okay.
I hope so too. That was kind of before I was really into like doing well in school and more just being into the class clown, and so she kind of hated me.
Look at you now, though. Look at what she did.
I needed to mature a little bit. Like I didn't get I got good grades, but I didn't get like straight A's or anything like that until like high school. It took me a while to just mature a little bit as a late bloomer academically.
Yeah, she sped up your maturation.
She did. You know, she called me on my BS, and bada bing, bada boom. Now I'm a doctor.
So really, we can thank her for today's episode. That's our shout out. I have no other shout out. That's a shout out.
Shout out, Mrs. Eatman. You're the best.
Okay, tell us the real shout outs.
Yeah, speaking of lying to enhance your ego, Toxic masculinity. So this is a very popular subject in today's world. We're going to hear this term thrown around quite a bit. There does appear to be a notion held by some people that men are getting softer, or that masculinity is changing in our society and men just aren't what they used to be. So we want to dive into the subject, see if men really are getting softer. What is toxic masculinity? So according to verywellmind.com, they have a good definition of toxic masculinity, and it's the notion that some people's ideas of manliness perpetuates domination, homophobia, and aggression.
Before we continue, do you want to give us the shout-outs for today's episode?
Sure. I was going to give a quick shout-out.
Mrs.
Eatman?
I already forgot her name.
Big shout out to the Mankind Project. I'm going to be on their podcast. We're recording in 2 days. And also, I think I talked about the Mankind Project a little bit on our last episode. But yeah, they're a group that really tries to help the emotional maturity of men, which I think is kind of a cool thing. At first, I was like, it's a group only for men. That's a little weird. But then I kind of realized, like, okay, well, it's trying to help men be more emotionally stable. So I like that. Yeah. And then also, big shout out to the Colorado Attorney General. We talked about it a little bit last week, about how they are suing Meta and Facebook for being terrible for kids' mental health, being aware of this and still doing it. I actually have a phone call with them on Friday as well, to talk about it and to give them my experience as a child and adolescent psychiatrist and see if I can help them out in any way. So very excited about that.
Damn. The CAG.
Yes, the CAG, the old Colorado Attorney General.
That's dope. Hell yeah.
Yeah. So Eddie, do you have any stories for me about toxic masculinity?
Before I give you a story, like when you're out there testifying, you're going to be on like those, like Mark Zuckerberg's going to be up there and you're like, you fucking lied. You knew.
Yes. I'm going to accuse Mark Zuckerberg of, pooping in the bed. Kind of like the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. It's going to be a mess,
I thought you were going to say, I'm going to accuse Mark Zuckerberg of being a robot. A lot of people
He could be. Yeah, or a lizard person too, right? There's lots of conspiracies.
That's the one. Well, in terms of positive masculinity, I told Justin before we started recording that, like, maybe it's good or bad. Like, nobody, like, stuck out right away as, like, an example. But I think the good end on that is that I hopefully, I guess this is my own opinion, but I am surrounded by people or by men that are not engaging in this like toxic masculinity. I think, I guess one positive for me is like, TikTok and Instagram and all these algorithms will like give you videos of things that you relate to. And I get none of that Andrew Tate bullshit, thankfully, that comes up. Like he's a huge piece of shit.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a positive, that there are just people around me that are not afraid to like be emotional. I think back to, I've had this conversation with coworkers before of like how much like football culture has changed, where it used to, I think a lot of people still assume that it's like this whole big like coaches just like shitting on kids and like calling them worthless and blah, blah, and that's how we motivate. But I think back to my high school, college days of playing football, that, I didn't really have that. Like there was a lot of like tough love and support, but there wasn't a lot of just like demeaning people for the sake of trying to get them to do better. So I guess that's a good example for me of like, thankfully having that experience. And I don't think ever having an experience with a coach who really was just out there shitting on kids. Like I have no other way to say it other than that.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah. And you mentioned your algorithm. I've been getting a lot of weird videos of like toxic masculinity lately. Like,
because you've been working on this.
I know. I wonder. Yeah. But like I get these videos of usually guys with really short hair or bald with giant beards. And just like they're usually in a room full of like super hot chicks, scantily clad, being like, women are the worst. Women are, they just don't get. And it's just like, why am I getting all this now? It's probably from researching this episode, but man, there is a lot of that on the internet. I'm starting to realize of just really insecure men being terrible to women. Yeah. Yeah. I would say a good example for me of positive masculinity was my dad. Shout out to John Romano, who I actually just gave COVID, so sorry about that, Dad. But he was always really in tune with his emotions. He wasn't afraid to cry in front of me. In fact, he probably cried too much. I remember him crying when we watched Babe 2, Pig in the City, and I was like, okay, Dad, tone it back. A little too much here. But looking back, he did such a good job of showing me how to treat and respect women. I feel like you learn so much of that from the male figures in your life, and I try, between him and my mom being very smart, very driven, also helped me really learn how to respect women and treat other people in general. There were times growing up when my dad would run into a homeless person, not with a car or anything, but just like run into a homeless person and buy him lunch and talk to him, just how to treat people, how to be nice, how to be kind, how to be loving, and how to be compassionate towards others. And so, boy, am I glad I had that example from my father.
Yeah. Yeah, as we shift into like history and background of the term toxic masculinity, or where we've seen it like in our culture, I just think of like how, and I know we talk about it later in this episode, but there's like really a push of like people trying to say that, and you talked about it already, of men or just people in general are softer, and seeing people like, the first one that came to mind was Candace Owens, like a very prominent African-American Republican figurehead or talking head, whatever you want to call her, saying things that like men need to go back to being men and blah, blah, but it's like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? Like, what does it mean to be a man? And people on TikTok and stuff will joke about, I just saw one the other day where it was like someone saying like, oh, men need to go back to the way they used to be. And then it was like a video of like an older man like yelling abusive things to his wife. Like that's the kind of thing that, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
When people say men need to go back to being how they were, like, what does that mean? I don't have any, not any, but I don't initially think of positive things. I think of like really negative, like toxic masculinity type things of like making women be the ones that are the caregivers and cleaning the house and cooking and stupid things like that, stupid gender roles like that a lot of people, I think, perpetuate when they say things like that. Like men need to go back to being the head of the household. And I don't know, that's the kind of stuff that I think frustrates me. But looking at history and background, the term toxic masculinity has actually been around since about the late 20th century. Some signs or some examples of toxic masculinity include things like homophobia, a need to be in control, promiscuity, refusing to help with household duties. I just kind of mentioned that. Risk-taking, also things like sexual aggression towards women. There's an Irish female comedian who talked about sex with American men as violent and aggressive, which is disappointing to hear that that's like the trope with American men. There's this idea of like stoicism, so the idea that showing emotion is weak. That's one that I think sticks out when people are saying that men and people are just softer in general, like just because they're able to show their emotions and feel confident or comfortable to do that doesn't mean it's a sign of weakness. I think if anything, Justin, you and I have talked a lot about it. I think that's a sign of strength, of being able to feel comfortable enough to share how you're actually feeling and not keep it to yourself. There's some studies that show that men are less likely to ask for help with their mental health. I think a perfect example for me, I think of like all the kids that I work with and that I help. I look at like my caseload, I guess, and the majority of them are female students. And there's not as many male students. I think that's a big piece to it. A lot of male students don't feel comfortable enough to ask for help. And my hope is that shifts, but that's definitely something that I've noticed. And there's really just shows that there's still a stigma around men asking for help. One final kind of sign or example of toxic masculinity is violence. So one survey showed that 23% of men in the U.S. believe that if needed, men should use violence to get respect. That goes back to that Andrew Tate bullshit of just like alpha male. That's the term that comes up a lot. Alpha male, blah, blah, like that shit is so cringe and stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, and to go back to the Irish comedian thing, I watched this clip of this Irish woman, and she was talking about, dating American men, and she was like, I had never been choked before in the bedroom. I had never been like slapped or my butt like hard spanked, and it's like it was a really good joke, and she was really funny about it, but it really helped me realize and understand that this is not all over the world. that this is worse in America, where it's like, if you do get intimate, there is this expectation that it should get a little aggressive. And not to dive too much into the old personal life too much, but I remember being with a girl for the first time that liked that. And I was kind of taken aback because that is not the way I was raised at all. And it took me a while, and I had to reprogram my brain because this girl actually, liked that, but I didn't understand that. And so it was this weird conflicting message where I was like, I don't think this is right, but it's something that she has been accustomed to, so I guess I got to do it. So it's weird.
Yeah. I think, and going back to Andrew Tate, that's the main example I think of, because he was so popular for a big chunk of time. And I remember actually, seeing on social media, people saying that they were concerned about how his message is going to impact young boys and young men, of how they need to act sexually with women, and how they have to assert their dominance and do these kinds of things. And unfortunately, I've run into students at school who at one point or another believe those things, or even just said those things a lot, and had negative things to say about the girls and women that they spend time with. And the concern being if you say those things enough, how long until you believe it's true, or maybe you already believe it's true, and that kind of stuff is concerning. And people who have such a high influence on these young boys and these young men, of how they can impact their thinking in the future.
Yeah, and for those of you who do not know, Andrew Tate is an influencer who has been charged in Romania with rape, human trafficking, and forming an organized crime group to sexually exploit women. So, not the best dude in the world, if you ask
piece
me. Of shit. Yeah. Yes. Well, let's dive into some stats and facts. So one study showed that 89% of female homicide was done by a man that the woman knew. So that just kind of shows you that what that relationship between men and women is like, especially in the United States, where, using violence to get respect, it can lead to some really horrible things. 60% of victims who knew their murderer were intimate partners or ex-partners. So the vast majority of times when women are murdered, they know the person, and it is most likely going to be a partner or an ex-partner. And then most often, women were killed during arguments. So when people are angry or when people have a disagreement. And one study from Iwamoto et al. In 2018 showed that young men transitioning to college were more likely to be depressed if they felt like they had to prove their masculinity with self-reliance, promiscuity, and violence. So this idea of toxic masculinity can be really hard on your mental health too, or at least according to this one study.
Yeah. The stat you bring up of 60% of victims were intimate partners or ex-partners, that's come up a lot in the crime podcast that I've listened to, of that ends up being the main suspect a lot of the times in these crimes. It's really sad because unfortunately it ends up being true, and the main suspect is your former or current partner, and they didn't have to really go far for them.
Yeah.
Some risk factors for toxic masculinity. So things that can impact someone to have these kinds of traits or believe in these kinds of things. Having a dysfunctional family environment. So Justin mentioned being able to learn from his parents, how to treat people with respect and to appreciate and respect women. In his upbringing, some people don't have that. So because they don't, they pick up things either through media or through friends or other places of how they think. Andrew Tate, for example, I keep bringing him up. I don't want to, but it's just a good example. People will pick up on what he's saying through his videos and things that he's put out and be like, oh, well, I haven't really learned it from anywhere else. So this is the truth. Other risk factors include things like exposure to social norms that encourage violence or male dominance. If that's the media or things that you consume, you start to think that is true or believe that is true. Like I mentioned earlier with the students, how long being exposed to these things until you start to believe that that's the truth, the ultimate truth. And that's the things you just start to believe.
Some other risk factors for toxic masculinity are things like lack of access to mental health services, lack of behavioral control, social rejection by peers, And I kind of build on a lot of these points too. I wonder, just the media that you're exposed to in general. Like, I've got a lot of young people that I see who play a lot of video games or do a lot of YouTube. And, when you're 6 or 7 years old, you don't know what you're watching. You tend to believe adults. So I have kids that play a lot of aggressive and violent video games at a really young age before they can kind of discern what is good, what is appropriate, what's not. And they say the wildest things. Like, I had a kid the other day that said he wanted to rip someone's eyes out. And it was just like, man, you're 6. Like, what influences do you have? And that's the tough part, is that it's not just your home environment these days. You have the entire world trying to change your mind and influence your thoughts on the internet, on our devices. So it's a crazy world we live in.
I remember the first time I got a video game that I should not have gotten. That was not rated for. It was not rated E for everyone. It was definitely an M for mature.
Uh-huh.
It was Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and I remember like getting it from Blockbuster and bringing it home and starting to play it. And I remember, like, as I started to like do some of these missions and it started to get pretty violent, like feeling like I shouldn't be looking at this. Like, this is not good. I didn't stop because I was however old and like didn't have that reasoning yet. But like, yeah, I remember like having like an actual reaction of like, oh, I should not be looking at this. This is not good.
Yeah, I feel you. And it's almost like, the Roman Empire. I think about Grand Theft Auto Vice City all the time. Like, in my in my day-to-day life, like, I don't know, I see a car or something, or I hear a radio station, and I think, oh yeah, that puts me like right back playing Grand Theft Auto Vice City. And when I was in college, I downloaded it again and played it again. And yeah, it is wildly violent. There are prostitutes there. And I remember when Grand Theft Auto 3 came out, my brother had come up to me and said, "You want to play this game?" I think I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. And I was like, sure. And he was like, it got banned in Australia because it's so bad. And I'm like, cool.
Yeah. It's hard because, like, I think up until a certain point, you could restrict what people were consuming content-wise. Yeah. But now it's like people have the entire internet at their fingertips, which, this is a side note, but I'll stand on the soapbox for a little bit, which is what blows my mind when it comes to these people that are trying to like ban books in libraries, especially like school libraries. Like, they don't want kids to have access to these certain things, but while they're up at school board meetings or complaining or, doing whatever it is to file formal complaints, their kids have like unprotected access to the internet at all times. And I would be willing to bet, if I was a betting man, I would be willing to bet like a month's salary that the shit that they're looking at is way worse than anything they could read at a book in a public school library. Easy bet, easy money. I don't know what the odds are. I don't know what Vegas is putting the odds at, but I'd make a lot of money back.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like one of the big ones these days too is that at least all my young patients are talking about Five Nights at Freddy's. Have you heard about this? Do you know?
Yeah. I've heard of it. I actually can't even tell you what it is, but I heard a movie just came out.
The movie just came out.
It was a video game.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was so. Like, the animatronic, kind of like a demented Chuck E. Cheese, where the animatronics come alive and kill people in horrible, horrific ways. And so, But I mean, I've got 5 and 6 year olds talking about Five Nights at Freddy's and these gruesome, horrific deaths, and I was just like, "What? Come on! This is crazy that you're able to be around this and you're consuming this media. It's just not good for you."
Unprotected access.
Yeah. So how do we make a change? How do we start moving in the right direction? How do we fight toxic masculinity? So being aware of these trends are important too. Being aware of what kids are watching on social media, trying to work on your own self so that you don't perpetuate some of the toxic masculinity stuff. One thing we always recommend is do not spank your kids, because this teaches kids that violence is okay in relationships and an appropriate way to resolve conflict. And other studies have shown that it's not a very effective parenting tool anyway. So as a general rule, we always say, just like, don't spank your kids. And since I've been working back in Wyoming, I have noticed that parents do this more in Wyoming than in Nebraska, where I did my residency and training. Like, it's not uncommon, but I actually called the CPS, and it's legal. It's legal to hit your kids as long as you don't bruise them or use a switch or use like a tool. So it's a little state dependent, and just shocks me that that's still totally okay.
One thing I've noticed, because I will say I've had a lot of CPS DHS calls this school year, like more I think than I've had in my other school years, and there's been ones with parents hitting child, and I've noticed that if they'll ask for clarification, like, oh, were you hit with a closed fist? Was it an open-handed slap? That kind of thing. That makes a difference for DHS. They take into account things like ethnicity and culture, and like I can understand that part. Like, if it's something's ingrained in a culture, still doesn't make it okay, but I can at least see that they're trying to take that into account for certain groups of people. But yeah, I've noticed the same thing. I think it's legal in Oregon, or it just depends on, again, if it's closed fist, open hand slap, things like that. I'm right there with you. It surprises me every time when they're just like, oh, okay, well, it's fine, kind of thing.
Yeah. And what I've noticed too is that if there's no bruising or like no physical evidence, then they don't really have a case. Yeah. So that's, sometimes parents can get away with some pretty horrible things just because there's not a lot of evidence. So yeah, it's a wild thing. But discussion questions for today. What things from your childhood has changed in a good way in terms of society, toxic masculinity, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I think just, I guess the people I've been around, or just maybe encountering more people, more men that just feel comfortable to be emotional, and like not to shy away from that kind of thing, not to be afraid of it. I have a coworker he's a coach, and he's shared a couple times, times he's been emotional with his kids and his student athletes that he's coaching. And I think that's really cool. I think that's really impactful for the kids to see like a positive adult male relationship that they have, to see that person be totally fine with crying or being emotional in front of you. I think is really helpful for kids in the long run.
Cool. Yeah, leading by example is so important. I'd say something that I've seen that has changed is even just our verbiage. When we were growing up, it was like, if something was bad, it was, oh, that's gay. Oh, that's, and we used to throw out the F word, the pejorative towards gay people all the time. Like, so our language is changing. I've also been curious recently. I've been watching like more movies from the early 2000s. Like, my wife and I watched Scary Movie a while back, and I just watched Van Wilder. And there are so many things, and this is just 20 years ago, not that long ago. There are so many things that just straight up would not fly today, and people will get crucified and canceled for it. And so, we hear a lot about, cancel culture and how bad it is. But honestly, the internet has helped give people a voice, so that if something is offensive, if something is mean and mean-spirited towards someone, they can come out and say something about it, to where before it was just silent. It was just people laughing at it, but you don't actually hear who hurts that. So I think that's one positive thing about the internet. That's one positive thing about social media, is that it's helping to shape our society and help us be more compassionate and understanding of more people.
Yeah, we've talked about it in a number of episodes where I think people feel comfortable enough to have a voice and like speak up on, like, I'm not by myself if I say that this is wrong. Yeah. Like, I know people will agree with me. People are able to make a community of other people that support them or that have similar values and views to them. Can't tell you the number of kids that I talk to or meet, and when you ask them about friends, it's friends online, not even friends that go to school with them or live near them. Like, you're able to make connections with people that help you at least feel comfortable in like who you are, and feel like you have a voice and you don't have to just deal with things that are inappropriate.
Yeah. Well, I got an interesting discussion question here. So now that we know that gender is a spectrum, what % masculine are you and what % feminine are you?
I don't know. I guess it depends on what you define as like. Well, then I think that opens up the question too. Then, like, okay, well, what do we say is like a masculine trait and what's a feminine trait?
True, yeah.
Because then that could like that could really give insight into what somebody like thinks of like how
Yeah.
they feel about certain groups of people. So I don't know, but yeah, I don't know. I guess it's a good thing to think about or be reflective about.
Your answer is it depends, you know.
Dude, that's the best answer, I'm telling you.
Yeah. And you know, I know I've worked with a lot of trans people, and I talk about this a lot on the show, but I have met young people that it changes. It is some people say like, oh, today I want to be more masculine, and tomorrow I might dress more feminine, like, and it doesn't matter. It seems like a lot of times people in society, they're like, well, you got to pick one and you got to stick with it. You can't change it. It's like, why? Who cares?
Exactly.
Like, is someone else's gender expression really that important to you? Like, why do you care so much?
Oh, that's like the $1 million question of like, what does it matter? Like, really, what impact does it have on you? And I don't even mean it. Like, I always want to say like, I don't care, but then that comes off as negative. It comes off as like, I don't care about you as a person. So it's not, I don't think of it as I don't care. It's more of just like, whatever makes you happy. That's the most important thing. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. Like, for people to get so hung up on like trying to decide for other people, it's so weird. It's so weird. That's the kind of stuff that needs to get bullied. That's where we need to bring bullying back, of like the people that are like super like negative about or trying to tell people what they need to think or believe or feel. That's what we got to bully out of people. Fuck that.
Okay. You heard it here first. Bring back bullying. Bring back
Sometimes
bullying.
It works, dude. Like,
it's effective.
The amount of people on like TikTok or whatever it is that'll say something like super negative and discriminatory, and that amount of people that just like shit on them that cause them to like delete their comment, is like, bullying sometimes works.
Yeah. Well, I'd say I'm 80% masculine, 20% feminine. Next question. There are political and social differences in terms of our views of masculinity. According to the Pew Research Center, 78% of people who lean Republican think it's a good thing that society looks up to masculine men. And yeah, it does seem like there is this idea in the Republican Party that, you know, you got to be rugged, you got to be tough, you got to be a man, you got to take charge. And yeah, it could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. But only 49% of people leaning Democrat think that it's a good thing to look up to a traditionally masculine men. So big changes there, from 78 down to 49.
Mm-hmm. The research center also found that Black men are more likely to identify as masculine than white and Latino men. And then men with college degrees were less likely to see themselves as masculine. So looking at these numbers, that the research center gave us, like, what do you think? What do you think about the trends?
I think the one that stands out to me is a college degree helps you see yourself as less masculine. And I think college just introduces you to a lot of different ideas and different things. And you see some really smart people who are not just like you. Like, I took a Harlem Renaissance class and fell in love with the literature of Black people in the 1920s. And, you know, so like it helped me understand how good cultures are, and how these things that we think are cultural norms are just our cultural norms. Like, they don't have to be set in stone. Any other insights from you, my friend?
I think the two that stuck out, I mean, the Republican Democrat one doesn't seem that surprising. I think that's such a like talking point with like super right wing conservative people of like, bring back traditional men, like whatever the fuck that means. I think the college one, exactly to your point, like, you just experience new things that you've never experienced before, and it helps you think in things of the way you've never thought about it before, and the new experiences are positive, which also on the other end makes me like a little like sad or feel for people that maybe just like college isn't for them, or they'd rather do like trade school or something else is better suited for them, of like people not being able to experience some of those things. So hopefully at some point in our near future, people can get to experience these opportunities without needing to go to college. Like, you don't have to, you know, go to school to be able to learn these things. I think the other one is the statistic of like Black men feeling to like they need to identify as masculine more than white and Latino men. I think that probably just comes, part of it is like the pressures that they feel societally, either within their own culture or from other cultures telling them they have to act a certain way. I feel like I've seen like discussion on social media of like, I think it was like a video of this group of guys on TikTok that has a pretty big following. They do like a bunch of dances and like coordinated in sync, all that stuff. And you'll see like a mix of comments like, damn, like why are guys like this nowadays? And then you'll get other comments that are like, you know, oh, you know, I'm reading through the comments and I'm seeing how negative these comments are to these guys. This is why our community doesn't open up or doesn't feel like comfortable enough to share things. So I think it's hard. I think people of color, especially Black people in our country, like have such high pressure coming from all different directions that it really just impacts who they feel they get to be and how they get to express themselves.
Yeah. Well, my friend, any other take-home points for us for today?
I think the big one, like I said earlier, is we got to let people just be happy with who they are, and not try to put, we can't put our expectations onto them and just assume that they need to follow those things.
Yeah. My take-home point is it's a healthy thing. It's a good thing to be in tune with your emotion. To give you an example, I met a kid once who said, he was like, yeah, you know, my dad was tough. He was strong. You know, he never talked about his emotions. He went to work. He worked hard. He provided for my family. And, you know, he never cried, that kind of thing. And then I asked, like, well, where is your dad? What's he doing? He's like, oh, he's dead. I'm like, he died of like bad alcoholism, and also he hated asking for help from doctors, and so died from a treatable infection. So it's like, this is important because it impacts mental health. Being able to talk about your emotions makes you stronger. It makes you a better, more adjusted human being. It's better for your physical health because you ask for help when you need it. Like, this is an important thing because it impacts your entire being as a person. So that's why we wanted to do this episode, and that's why we take this so seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Let's end with that. I like it.
Play us out, Eddie.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. We didn't mention this at the beginning, but we just crossed 4 years of the show. I told Justin, we're over the hump. Now the rest is easy. Thank you guys for supporting us throughout the years, whether you've been here through the beginning through my shitty mic, or you've been here recently through some of the good stuff we're putting out. We appreciate you. On Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, you know where to find us. On Apple Podcasts, feel free to leave us a 5-star review and leave us a comment if you'd like to do so. On Spotify, you can do the same thing with a 5-star review or a comment. On social media, at Millennial MHC, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, we're there. Feel free to find us. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for an amazing 4 years. We're excited for the next 4. And remember, take care of y'all mentals.